Hey, welcome to our podcast. You're watching Cultivate, brought to you by Boveda, connecting you to the people and the new processes in the cannabis industry. Remember,
never dry by. Just kidding. Never buy dry. So today we've got another fun interview lined up with Keystone Labs. We're going to dive into kind of what they do. They're in Canada, so it's a little bit different than here in the States. But we're going to dive into kind of their process, what the role they play in the cannabis industry, and then just how all of the testing has to go through them.
You're listening to Cultivate, a podcast about the people and technology that are blazing a trail in the cannabis industry. Welcome to another episode of Cultivate, and today's special guest is Keystone Labs. Our friends Jodi and Rod, Jodi McDonald and Rod Szarka are with us from Keystone Labs. How you doing?
Doing great. Happy to be here.
And we're actually in Toronto filming this right now, which is kind of cool. So this is exciting.
Yeah, we're here for the Lift Show, and we actually met our friends from Keystone Labs at a Lift Show in Vancouver a few years ago.
2016.
2016.
Yeah.
Wow. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, so it's 3 lifts ago.
3 lifts ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Couple of the most pleasant people I've ever met at a show. And unbeknownst to me, you were new. It looked like you'd been in the industry for a long time, but you were new. And
Brand new.
We got into some conversation about your business. So, do you remember what your expectations were at the Vancouver show? And can you talk about how things have changed now?
Sure. We had just started doing cannabis testing. We had just launched at the Vancouver show our Keybox test, which was a personal cannabis test kit. We thought we were going to sell out. We brought 2 bags full of kits and we sold 4. So that was a little eye-opening. And then since then we've started to develop a brand and people recognize us at the shows and now we can sell a bag full of kits.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You're here and you're back. Anytime we have people come back to the next show, it's always a big relief because typically in the cannabis industry, 80% of the exhibitors are not the same next year. There's so much attrition in this young fledgling business that you start seeing some of the same people. And we had a cordial and friendly relationship immediately.
We did.
Because you're so friendly and so pleasant.
So are you.
Yeah, and so is Rod.
Indeed.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, indeed. 100%, as they say up there. Yeah. Can you talk about what your expectations were when you started Keystone Labs and how it's blossomed and how it's different from what you expected?
Sure. So I started Keystone Labs in 2005. We were a pharmaceutical test lab. We're providing third-party testing for health innovation companies in Canada and really around the world. And then in 2013, we started to see a change in the people who were calling us. Small home growers were asking us if we could do testing for them, and I thought no. And then the more they called, the more I started to think maybe I got to think about this a little bit. So in 2015, we were licensed by Health Canada to do cannabis testing. And then we met you guys at the Vancouver show in 2016.
And you showed up with your premier product,
That's right,
T-Box.
the Keybox.
The Keybox.
Keybox. Unlock your testing. Unlock your results.
Unlock your results. It was a very catchy, very wonderful branding opportunity. And how did that go?
Yeah, well, we were super excited for launching our first product. So we showed up with 2 bags full of Keyboxes and we sold 4. And since then, we've been able to sort of develop some brand following. People recognize us at the show and we can sell our bags full now. So
What is the Keybox? What is it exactly?
So it's a personal cannabis test kit. So anybody who's growing at home or doing extractions at home, or if they're accessing products that they're not sure of the integrity of the product they're buying, they can do a small chemistry experiment at home. They send it back to us in the lab and we run it in the same way we do the commercial testing for the big producers. Wow. And then we email you a test report that looks very similar to what we send to the licensed producers.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
So do you find other people copying your process and working on kits, the similar approach that you've had to making it easy for the consumer?
We haven't seen it yet. There are some real-time test kits that are available. They're not always reliable. So this isn't real-time. This is something you do a small chemistry work at home. You do all the sample preparation for us, and then it takes about 5 days from the time we get it back in the lab for us to send you results. But there are products available that give you sort of a sense, we call it a pH test. It's just sort of bucket chemistry. People are looking at is it there or is it not there?
And why is it so important to test cannabis? I mean, I think as the industry is evolving, you're hearing a lot more about testing and the importance of testing.
From my perspective, testing gives you the opportunity to control what you're using, what you're consuming. It also ensures that the product you're using is safe.
Yeah.
And that's really the bottom line for us, is about safety, is about protecting the clients who are using the products.
And so when you're testing, what are you looking for in these tests that are going to say this is a quality, safe product or it's not?
So there's in Canada, the federal government regulates which tests the licensed producers need to do in order to release their products for consumer use. Potency is one of them, so looking at THC and CBD content in all the products. And then contamination is the big other group of tests that we do. So microbial contamination, so we count how much is there, and we also look for specific pathogens. And then there's pesticides testing, so we're looking for the absence of pesticides, absence of heavy metals, and then there's a whole group of toxins that we're looking for that also we want to be absent.
Interesting.
Is it interesting? Yeah.
No, I from my own knowledge too, I just want to know the process like that a licensed producer has to go through, like just from start to finish in terms of testing.
Right. So they have a quality assurance person on staff, and that person sort of directs the process flow of products. So once it's packaged, it goes into quarantine. They statistically sample the products that have been packaged and send them to us for testing. Once we send them data, that quality assurance person takes a look at all of the production records, and then they verify that the test data we sent them meets the requirements Health Canada has, and then they release the product into the consumer market.
And how long does that whole is it a quick process or is it a long?
Yeah, well, it can take some time. Typical turnaround in the industry right now is about 10 days for testing.
Oh,
yeah.
It's not too bad.
I don't know whether I've just become a nerd for nerds, and I don't mean to say nerd in a pejorative way.
I have
I'll
a
tell you
nerd
what that means
badge.
later.
Yeah, I actually don't know what that means.
So, lab people are some of the best people that we meet at shows. And I mean, we had an immediate connection with you and Rod at the show. I mean, your attitude, your enthusiasm, this whole scientific trip about cannabis and what we don't know. So many of us laymen that don't know what this plant's capable of doing. So I get to know all these lab people, and I love these lab people. I've really become fond of you guys. You know that. I've always gone out of my way to say hi to you guys, and we have fun together. But I met this crew from EVIO Labs, and I really, they're awesome people. And you've got some recent news about something that happened between you and our friends at EVIO Labs. Can you talk about that?
Sure. We met EVIO in January in Vancouver, Lift. And they started a conversation with us, and we were looking for a way to kind of grow our business. And EVIO said, we are looking for a partner in Canada. So we're partners.
That's
now
awesome.
Officially, yeah.
That's awesome. So as a disclaimer, I was so fond of these people from EVIO Labs, and there's all these startups in the cannabis industry, right? And EVIO, these are solid people, really lovely people. And when I get to know managements of companies that I like, I always check out their public offering page and everything, and I bought a few shares of EVIO. So when I heard that they got into cahoots with you, I bought a few more shares of EVIO.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah. So congratulations. That's
Thanks.
a big deal.
We're really excited.
So you're internationally aligned now.
Does that mean you'll be
world.
going to trade shows in the U.S.?
Possibly. I think they have a team down there.
Yeah.
We're definitely doing more trade shows in Canada.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So how many shows do you do a year?
Handful, like 6 maybe. 6, 7. Yeah.
And this is probably the best show of all
We
of them.
love Lift.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Lift Vancouver was so productive for us this year.
Yeah. So, I mean, when we went to Lift Toronto, that was actually our first show together. Well, technically the second show, but it was all in one trip when we went to Champs in Atlantic City. But, I mean, it was mind blowing. All of our samples were gone within 3 hours the first day.
Oh, wow.
No,
And-
we had no samples the rest of the show. We just stood in the booth waving at people.
Yeah. And we were new on the scene in Canada. I mean, it was our first big show in Canada, probably our first trade show in Canada.
I think they had 20,000 people show up.
Yeah. And it was, I mean, and then ever since then, Lyft has been just phenomenal for us, and everyone that works at Lyft has been great. So I love these shows.
Well, and Lift for us is to Canada what the MJ Biz shows are for us in the US.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So as far as the competition, as far as the number of labs that have come online as the regulatory framework shifts and as things progress, how is the competitive marketplace? What do you see? What do you expect? Are we going to have a lot more labs get on board? Is there a demand for a ton of labs? Can you talk about that?
Sure. So a year ago, there was a handful, like around 10 labs across Canada. Now there's close to 30.
Wow.
But Health Canada is changing the regulations. So the requirements for capital investment, like buying equipment, is much higher than it was a year ago. So I think we'll see some labs disappear, and we'll see other labs come in their place.
Or some will consolidate with other labs.
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Do you have any crazy stories from any testing that you've done, or is there
Funny thing? Yeah. We so our first show was Vancouver.
Yeah.
In 2016. We got back to the lab, and within minutes of us walking through the door, the phone rang, and it was the police from Vancouver calling us. And both Rod and I are looking at each other like, what did you do? Yeah. And they actually saw us at the show and had collected some samples that they wanted tested. So it was cool to work with them. But in the moment that they said, this is the Delta police calling, we were a little worried.
I would be worried.
Well, especially if you're overwhelmed with guilt in the first place. It really elicits a lot of fear.
We hadn't been to confession yet. So yeah, it was a big day.
So you work with with the feds and with the provincial governments. Is there a connection there?
So in Canada, it's the federal government that regulates all the testing. So they say what needs to be tested. The LPs choose the samples for testing. We provide testing, and then Health Canada checks in with both sides.
So we've have our federal government is not in line and doesn't have a plan, at least that they've shared with us yet, about how they're going to handle the federal cannabis business. So each one of the states is their own jurisdiction, and the feds are largely looking the other way. And it's a real disadvantage for us. I mean, today in California, everybody's complaining about how the regulatory framework has really hampered the growth of the business and even threatened the survival of the business for a lot of people in California. How is it working with Health Canada? Is this one of those softballs where you're going to tell us how great they are?
Oh, they're so fantastic. Hello, Health Canada.
100%.
Yes.
100.
They started, I don't think they anticipated the response in 2013 when they rolled out the legislation. Quickly after they rolled out our first legislation, there was legal challenges to it, so they've changed it since then, and we're moving towards the Cannabis Act, which will allow for adult use legalization. In terms of Health Canada as a regulatory body, they're a government agency, so they move as fast as they want.
I've noticed that when we have tried to communicate with them, it's slow.
It's like any government. Mm-hmm. So we just had an example of how wonderful and polite Canadians are, and we could really take a lesson out of their playbook as far as how to talk to regulators, because you guys are so nice. You're so polite. I mean, it's one of the things I love. Have I told you that I love Canadians?
Yeah, I think you said it a few times in the last hour.
Yeah, I love Canadians. I do. If I weren't an American, I'd be a Canadian. Okay, so on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being really square, 1 being really whatever the opposite of square is.
Round? A circle? Come on now.
I mean, where are you on the spectrum? Because you're a scientist, first and foremost.
Yeah, very square.
So
Very
way up
square.
there, like a 9 square?
10, straight
10?
10, yeah.
Where's Rod on the scale?
10 is too low for a rod.
Really?
Yeah.
So you're both pretty rectangular.
Yeah. Got some right angles here.
Yeah. So how about the conversation about the plant? Mm-hmm. How do you personally interact? Are you a cannabis consumer?
I am not.
Have you tried CBD?
I have not.
Are you open to the idea of trying it? This is not
Absolutely.
This is not a deposition.
Oh, right. I have not tried this, Mom. I've never tried it. Because it's not legal yet in Canada, I'm a rules follower. I'm open to trying it.
Do you cross at the corner?
Of course.
Do you wait for the light?
Always.
Do you ever go in the middle of the block?
No. Why would you do that?
God, I love you. I just think that's so great. Yeah.
I'm not a rule follower, if you haven't noticed, but
I'm not much of a rule follower. I used to be really not square. I became sort of by necessity rather square because I had such a horrendous problem with drugs and alcohol when I was a young man. And then I've been out of that for a long time. And
what,
34 years. So I come into the cannabis industry with a sense of history and some awe about the fact that I'm actually at a cannabis event or that we're having conversations about this. And then I listen to the testimonials of people and how this plant has changed their lives. And it blows me away. I mean, you must hear a lot of stories as you've been hanging around. Do you have any that stand out?
We get story. The phone rings and it's a story. Always. There's always a story on the other end. I think probably the most touching stories we hear are from parents who are trying to help their children.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that really make you believe, or at least stop and think more critically about your opinion about the plant, for sure.
Yeah. Buddy of mine who I partied with as a young man, he's a guitar virtuoso, and he developed a brain issue called focal dystonia. And he lost the use of his hands, which is his livelihood. He also happened to have a son who was suffering from epileptic seizures, a lot of epileptic seizures, to the point where the young man was really challenged with carrying on with his life. And they took on the cannabis therapies to try to help the young man and see if it would impact my friend's playing ability. And it completely changed their lives. Wow. To hear the testimonials of going from hundreds of seizures a month to maybe one or two. I mean, it's just remarkable.
So if a sample fails, what happens then? Does it just get thrown away?
So from our perspective, the data is data.
Yeah.
It's not good or bad for us. It's just data.
Yeah.
But the quality assurance person with the commercial producers then has to make a decision about what happens with the plant.
Yep.
So with Health Canada's requirements for quality testing, failing test results means they have to destroy the products. Yeah.
This question's kind of a stretch coming from Boveda. So the stretch is, do you use humidity control in your process, or do you measure water activity in the bud that you analyze?
So we don't control humidity. In fact, moisture is a critical quality test that we run. So as a product ages and they dry and cure it, the humidity has to be at a certain level for it. I think for somebody who uses it, there's a key amount of moisture that's critical. From a scientific perspective, the more water, the more bad the product becomes. It's a really good breeding ground for fungus, as water and plant together makes the fungus grow really.
So do you have a sense of what the water activity is in the cannabis that you analyze? I mean,
so Health Canada has a requirement that a labeled product has to be less than 10% moisture. So super dry.
Super dry.
That almost hurts my throat. I don't even smoke and it hurts my throat just talking about it.
Yeah, no, that would really rip your throat.
Especially my throat. It's very sensitive.
So important for Boveda then.
Well,
right?
you can go there if you want to. We're happy to talk about Boveda. But, I mean, I would recommend using Boveda. But we don't do this. Isn't a commercial for Boveda.
Nice plug. So at Vancouver in the winter, and you came over and he's like, "Hey, I saw your podcast. I think we only had done an episode or two, so I was surprised that
about 2 or 3
that you had seen it, which was really cool for me to hear." And he's like, "I want to be a part of it," and I'm like, "Yes, let's do it." So here we are.
Glad you're here. This is Rod Szarka from Keystone Labs. How you doing?
Good, and you? Thanks, Drew. I just want to put a plug out. You know, you always talk about how nice we are at Keystone, and the guys at Boveda, Drew and Scott, have been amazing. Always friendly to talk to and always complimentary. So it's been fun.
It has.
Well, we used to think, when we started going to shows, you'd look around and you're a little scared because you wonder if your company's going to make it or not. Well, we weren't really scared about that, but a lot of people are. But you're like, who's going to help me? Who matters? Who doesn't matter? And then after the third or fourth show, something magical happens and you go, well, everybody matters, and we're all in this together.
Yep.
And you become connected to people that have nothing to do with your business. And then as time goes on, the guy at that company that doesn't have anything to do with your business is suddenly the head of this LP, or they're doing, there's different people move around.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a small industry, absolutely.
Yeah.
Prime example, Peter from Lyft, who was a great friend and was always wonderful to us when he worked at Lyft, now is over at Believe, the LP, which is really cool because he reached out and wants to talk about working together. But I mean, it's a prime example. So yeah, it's always treat people with respect. And
thanks for saying that, Rod.
Yeah, no problem. Well, and to you, Scott, like, you never want to burn a bridge in this industry, I don't think, because it could come back and haunt you. So
exactly.
That's why I'm saying very good things about you guys.
Yeah. And we gotta that's very strategic. So
That's good.
So tell us the story about how you got involved with Keystone Labs.
Sure. So Jodi and I have a career past. We worked back in mid 90s. We started at a government research facility in Edmonton, and we've always talked about working together again. Jodi, of course, branched out and started Keystone. I went a different route and was working in biotech and pharma companies, and we've always talked about getting the band back together. And so in 2016, I had an opportunity to come back and work with Keystone when she got into the cannabis industry, to help her with the marketing and business development of that part of the business. So it's been a great 2 years so far. It's been a lot of fun.
And from your perspective, where do you see the industry going with new products, innovation? I mean, you probably have a pretty good perspective just doing the sales and marketing and talking to people and being out there on the front lines.
Yeah, and one of the things I really think where the business is going to go is the craft grower. Mm-hmm. I really believe that. I think it's going to be very similar to the craft beer market. Mm-hmm. You get your Labatt's, you got your Coors Light, and then those are going to be your Canopy Grow. Those are going to be your Auroras in Canada anyway. But you're going to see these craft growers, and I think what I believe is that these underground growers that have been under the radar are going to start popping up with all these new strains that people, I think, will pay $20, $30 a gram for.
Yeah.
Like the beer market. So I really think the craft market is going to be a big thing. For innovation, it seems like the extraction component, like CO2 extraction, you see a lot of them around. Like when we went to MJ Biz in Vegas, it was extraction and vape pens.
Yeah.
That really seems to be where the next market is for that. So
The convenience. I mean, it's
absolutely.
You have a little pen in your pocket. You're not grinding up flour and packing it into a bowl or whatever, rolling a joint.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have that crazy smell, so it's pretty discreet when you can be walking down the road or in your house or wherever, and it's convenience.
And I think the next thing too is with the different strains, and I think the different terpene profiles are going to be really of interest, and kind of identify different LPs or production facilities with those specific strains and specific profiles for, and I think that goes back to the craft grower having that specific profile in the cannabinoids and the terpenes.
So as a scientist and as fair to say, a non-cannabis consumer,
Correct.
what do you and Jodi do to stay, how people have continuing education credits when they do their professional upkeep to their certifications and all that? How do you do that? Is there a area in this scientific realm that's your, wheelhouse that you really personally love, or are you required to do that kind of constant education, or how does it work?
Well, I'll say, if you were to tell me 10 years ago I was going to be working in the cannabis industry, I would have laughed at you. Absolutely. I was just like, no way. I grew up very strong Roman Catholic family. Cannabis was, yes, thank you.
Same here.
And cannabis was a no-no. And I never tried it all through high school. My mother and father would have probably disowned me. But anyway, so I knew nothing about it. Never tried it. Don't know the effects of it. So when I first started coming to Keystone and being the business development and marketing person for the cannabis portion of Keystone, we had a lot of learning to do, and so it was a lot of reading, talking to people, talking to the people in the industry, the personal growers, and coming to the shows and learning. Like, it's been the 2 years that I've been with Keystone has been a huge learning curve, exponential.
Yeah.
And it's still daily learning about this plant.
Well, and we assume that we're behind the times in the States because of the federal limitations. And we respect Canadians and we respect the Israelis for all the research that happens in these market environments of Israel and in Canada. I mean, the Canadians have got it together. And there's so much happening scientifically in Canada, and there's so little happening scientifically. I mean, there's more now than there ever has been because of the creeping normalization of cannabis laws. But there's still such an open, empty locker of information. There's such a lack of research. Do you agree that that's sort of the Canadians lead in that department, or how do you see it?
I think they're starting to be leaders. I think you're seeing, and particularly around Canada, a lot of the universities are putting in programs for cannabis. You're seeing academia getting more into research of the plant. And now you're also seeing clinical evaluations or clinical trials with cannabis within Canada. So we're starting to get a lot of the data, scientific data, that will hopefully help the plant in the long run. In the pharmaceutical industry, they require long clinical trials, human clinical trials, phase 1, 2, and 3, which can take up to 10 years to get a product on the market.
Crazy.
And so, it'd be nice to get that data for the plant and show people what its capabilities are.
Yeah.
Awesome. Rod, really appreciate you taking the time to be on the, you're listening to, watching a podcast called Cultivate, put on by Boveda, sharing with you the people and the technology that are blazing a trail in the cannabis industry. Rod Szarka from Keystone Labs, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been great.
This is awesome.